Well, hello there. Again, I'm Pastor Dale, and I'm from the Eastwood congregation, and this is the first Wednesday in Lent. We had Ash Wednesday last week, and today is the first Wednesday in Lent. And during Lent, we're going to do something a little interesting. What we are going to do is talk about the different I am statements which Jesus made. And with that, we're going to go with the spring feeling, the spring essence, if we might say, of Lent. That is where there's a new beginning, and it's about bringing in life. And so the first one is found, his I am statement. You might remember where the I am statement came from. You remember when Moses was before the burning bush, and he asked who he is, and the Lord said, Lord couldn't compare himself to anything. He's the one who created all that exists. He created everything that the Egyptians worshipped. He created the Egyptians themselves, and in fact the Israelites. And so he's the Father and the God of all these things. And so he has nothing to compare himself. He can't say, I'm like the sun god, or I'm like the moon god. That would make him less. He's greater. He created these things. And so he simply told Moses, I am who I am. And it's just a fantastic statement. He is the I am. In him is the beginning, and in him is all things. And so that's why we're going to look at that. And so the first I am statement that we're going to look at is found in John chapter 6. And that's where Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Now, if you read all of chapter 6, and I encourage you to do so, if you read all of chapter 6, you will recognize that it starts out in the beginning where there's a bunch of people, and so there was a multitude of people. And so Jesus then had was speaking to that multitude of people, and then threw it out, and it was near Passover. And what's so interesting about Passover is the Passover to the Israelites was when this heightened expectation of the Messiah was there. And in fact, a part of Passover really looks forward to the Messiah. And so it was coming into Passover. There are all these people. They're getting hungry. And you might remember the story of feeding the fishes, feeding with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. And he feeds the thousands. There's 5,000 people, and that's men, along with their women and children. So there were more than 5,000. And they fed them, and there were 12 baskets of food left. And one of the things about Passover, and one of the things about the expectation of the Messiah, would be this abundance of food. It would be this abundance of food. And so we see in verse 15 here in chapter 6 where Jesus had to leave because they were going to make him the king, because he is the Messiah. And what's very interesting about bread is bread was the essence of life. It was the very thing in which sustained life. And so food was not easy to come by. You didn't have Walmarts that were open 24/7 where you could go buy food and groceries. Basically, most of their life was spent making sure that they would have shelter and they would have food. And so it was very important. And for those who were poor, if they at least had bread, they had hope. And if they at least had bread, they could dab it in salt. Even if they might not have had anything else with it, there was bread at least to feed. And so it's a very thing which sustains life. And that's what's so important about this whole story and this whole picture of bread. I am baking a loaf of bread. And in today's day and age, we have a difficult time understanding that, because in today's day and age, for some of us, bread is not a healthy thing. I'm told by my doctors I can't eat bread. And I love bread. So you don't know what this does for me to have this bread. And you're going to see a beautiful, wonderful, beautiful, just delicious loaf of bread that is coming out this today. And we'll remember this as where I am the bread of life. Now, what's very interesting here is that when Jesus does that, he compares it to the days of manna, in the days of when the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness and they were without food. And and God did this miracle that there were 600,000. Imagine 600,000 people, men. That doesn't include counting the women and children. 600,000. And they couldn't stop and raise the wheat and the barley. They couldn't stop and raise whatever it took in order for them to bake the bread. And so what, they were going to be left there to starve? That was a big question they had. And Jesus sent to them manna. And manna came in the morning with the dew and what was left there, and it was a form of bread. And so this is what they ate. They would gather together and they would eat bread. And that bread sustained their life. That's what kept them alive, along with the water that he was given. And so it's just fantastic. Well, anyway, here we go. There is the loaf of bread. This is the thing that when you can eat it, it sustains you. All right. Bread. Wonderful, wonderful, beautiful bread. I am a fan of bread, but I just squished my loaf of bread. I like to do this thing where you put the butter on top of it. Now I remember when they were getting that bread, you might remember there in the wilderness, it kept them alive, but they complained, when are we going to get meat? And of course, God had answered that too, with the pigeons and the doves. Well, early in this chapter of chapter 6, the people there who were fed followed Jesus because they wanted him to continue to feed them, to make them as a king. This is the thing that you're looking at. And he says, you're just looking for fodder for your belly. This is all you're looking for. And so this is what they chased after him. And then he told him this thing. He says, what you're looking for really just satisfies you in this life. But what about the eternal life? What about eternity? And they talked about manna. They brought up the whole thing of manna and the story of manna. And he said, how many of those people do you see walking around in this world right now who ate manna in the time of wilderness? They're dead. But he says, there is a bread that will give to you eternal life. It'll give you life eternal. And he speaks of it in his own self, in his own place, in his own body. And here's what he says. It's just a fantastic story. He says, I am the bread of life. Your fathers did eat manna in the wilderness and are dead. This is the bread which comes down from heaven, that a man may eat thereof and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live forever, and the bread that I will give it is of my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. Listen to that. He gives for the life of the world. That bread of life. This is wonderful. Beautiful bread right here. Can you imagine butter on that? It's delicious. And this bread, as delicious and wonderful as that is, will sustain my life for a day, but not for eternity. You see, that's the thing that Jesus Christ is talking about. What is it that sustains us in eternity? What is it that brings us to that place where we can live forever without falling, without death? And Jesus says, it is He. So remember this when we thank God for this bread, this wonderful bread which we can eat and celebrate. That yes, it sustains us today, but He's the one who sustains us in eternity. We'll catch you later. That is wonderful.